Hi guys, Chilifreak here, and welcome to this video. In today's video, I'm going to talk about the build that I've been playing around with in Harbinger League, which is a Scion Dark Pact Totem build. And the reason I'm talking about it so late in the league is because I imagine a lot of you folks are looking for potential starter builds right now for the upcoming War for the Atlas expansion, which I hope you're as excited about as I am. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about what this build was based off of, and then I'm going to show you my gear and skill tree, and then finally we're going to look at some footage that I have so you can see the build in action. And I'll have time skips written in the description if you want to skip to any of these parts. Depending on the interest that you show for this build, I will also make videos where I showcase my Guardian and SHEPUUURD boss fights. But that's a topic for another video. So now let's get into the video. So I'm going to start by showing you my character page here. You can see I have 5,384 life and 2,405 mana, but this is a mind over matter build, so you can add those together and you will get my total life pool. You also have almost 1,000 energy shield there. So it adds up to about, yeah, somewhere between 7,000 and 8,000, which is a pretty decent life pool. And I'm level 90, so of course it takes a while before you can reach this amount of life, but it's still a very cheap build and definitely a good starter alternative. But this build was based off a more expensive build, which we're going to take a look at right now. This build, the Dark Pact Totems build, designed by SHEPUUURD. He claims it's cheap and beginner friendly, which is quite interesting considering it has a 6-linked soul mantle in it, which is, well, if you take a look at PoE trade right now, we're talking at least 8 exalted, I believe, maybe 7 exalted if you're lucky. I wouldn't consider that cheap, but let's not get into debates here. The point is this build is even cheaper, and it still produces some pretty nice results, like killing the Guardians and SHEPUUURD. I wouldn't say that you can farm them with this build. I don't know, maybe if you're really good at the game, like Mathil, you could, but if we're talking the average player, I think this is not a tier 16 farming build, but it's still possible to farm, I'd say, tier 13, 14, maybe even 15 maps, if you're a bit selective. Anyhow, let's take a look at the gear, which we have right here. So as you can see, I'm running a dual wield setup with 2 wands, where I've basically tried to maximize my amount of spell damage and spell crit. I've also tried to get additional damage to spells, elemental damage then, and also cast speed and global crit. But that's of course not a must, but it's good for damage. So we can also take a look at the helmet I'm having here right here. As you can see, I'm using a helmet with the enchantment mod for Dark Pact, which increases its area of effect. This is of course pretty nice if you're clearing maps, because the area of effect will make clearing more efficiently. And then of course I get my life from my helmet, amulet, rings, and boots and belt. And also actually from my chest here, which I crafted using an essence of greed, a deafening essence of greed, and was lucky to roll 1 resistance on it as well. Let's take a look at the amulet. As you can see, it has life and resistances, but I also tried to get mana regeneration rate here. You can see that also on my 2 rings. And the reason for that is because we're running a mind over matter build, and what that means is that we're gonna have to treat mana not only as a resource for spending that you spend when you use spells, but also life. It's part of your life. So mana regeneration is life regeneration, and it's much more easy to get a high amount of mana regeneration boost than it is to get life regeneration, and we can of course abuse this by getting it as a mod on our items. Yeah, so I think that also explains basically what the rings are all about: life, rest, and mana regeneration. Then we have these gloves here. the Voidbringer gloves, and the reason they're there is because it increases the critical strike chance for spells, but it also actually increases the mana cost of skills. And the reason why that is something good, which it normally wouldn't be, is because I'm using an Arcane Surge setup, and as I believe you know, Arcane Surge gives you increased cast speed and spell damage, quite an amazing amount of that, but in order to activate it you need to spend a lot of mana, and that's where the Voidbringers actually synergize pretty well with this setup. So I'm running Arcane Surge with a Assassin's Mark, which is basically because Assassin's Mark, as any curse, spends a lot of mana. So I also want to say that this setup that I'm using here is actually not the right setup. You're supposed to have an increased duration, a 4-linked setup with this, which means that the Assassin's Mark costs even more, and more importantly, you get an Arcane Surge that lasts for maybe 8 seconds. Let's move on to the boots, which are, I think, one of the more expensive parts on my gear. And the reason for that is because it has this critical strike chance if you haven't crit recently mod, which is quite expensive to get if you also want to get movement speed and resistances and life. I actually had to craft on these boots, so I didn't get that high amount. But still, as you can see, if you add my mana pool and life pool together, it's still enough, I would say. Of course, that critical strike chance mod is not a must. It's an alternative if you get some money that you want to spend, which was the reason I bought these boots. Then we have the belts, which in this case I've only tried to get as much life as possible and resistance as possible. Yeah, if we take a look at my flask setup, I'm using 2 life flasks, 1 insta flask, and 1 anti-freeze pod. Now I would say that you don't need 2 life flasks, but I'm a bit of a coward, so I do have 2 of them. I think that if you want 1, you should make sure that it's an instant pot, maybe anti-bleed or anti-freeze. So that's probably the best setup, and I'm using 2 life flasks, 1 quicksilver, 1 diamond, and 1 mana pot. And we take a look at the mana pot, I think that's probably one of the worst flasks I actually have. The reason I have it is, I think because I was running earlier no mana regeneration maps, so due to that I needed the mana flask to sustain my mana pool because it would run out. But don't use this flask or believe that a mana flask is somehow like a life flask, because it's not. The regeneration rate is very low, so if you're in a tight spot, the mana regeneration you get from this flask is not gonna save you from danger. So I just want to point that out. Then of course the Quicksilver and Diamond Flask are really good alternatives. Quicksilver is good because you don't have very high movement speed with this build, which I've really felt because I played together with Crisped, and he has a ranger character, which clears pretty fast, and then it really sucks if you don't have movement speed. so yeah, that's one of the downs with this build, basically, that you don't have a very high amount of movement speed. So Quicksilver is absolutely a must, especially on boss fights where you have to dodge different mechanics. And Diamond Flask is good because it boosts your crit and thereby your damage. So I would say that if I would recommend a flask setup, you should use 1 life pot and 2 Quicksilvers and 2 diamond flasks. Or you can also replace one of the Quicksilvers with a silver flask if you want to. That's up to you. I haven't really tried these different setups. I've just gotten used to this one and never changed it. So let's take a look at my main damage setup, which I have in my chest here. So I'm using Dark Pact connected to Spell Totem, and the damage link setups I'm using are Controlled Destruction, Faster Casting, Added Chaos, and increased area of effect, but I have Concentrated Effect here, which is of course supposed to be there on boss fights. And this setup does quite a lot of damage, but there are several things that increases the damage setup. If we take a look at the tooltip, we can already see that with the concentrated effect, I'm up at 40,000. Let's switch it to increased AoE, and we're at 26,204. One thing that we can do to scale it is, of course, using Arcane Surge, but another thing is placing totems. And when we get up to full power charges, which are 5 power charges, and use Arcane Surge, you can see that it's already risen to 40,953. And of course, if we add a Wither Totem to this, the damage scales even higher. And then we also have my Lightning Warp setup, which is one of my utility setups for movement, which is, of course, because I'm using wands here, so Lightning Warp is the go-to option. And then we have Lightning Warp in a 4-link setup connected to Restoration, Faster Casting, and Swift Affliction. This is the best possible setup if you want to run this movement skill. You can also remove Swift Affliction. It really doesn't add much, but I just wanted to make sure that I have maximize my movement with this skill. And of course, if you're using Quicksilver, that also scales the speed of this spell. So that's another reason why Quicksilvers are good for this build. And then finally, I'm going to show you my helmet setup, which is Wither, coupled with increased duration and spell totem. I also have a decoy totem here, because on certain bosses, as you will see in the upcoming footage, it's actually pretty handy to have that instead of a Wither totem. Now, this is a perfect transition for me to show you the tree. So we're done with the gear now. We're going to move on to the skill tree, because the reason I'm using Wither Totem in my helmet is because this build, my version of this build, contrasting to the SHEPUUURD's version, uses the Hierophant Ascendancy for Scion instead of the Guardian Ascendancy. And the reason for this is because it gives you an additional totem as long as you place the socket for that totem in your helmet. So that's why I'm using Wither Totem in my helmet and Decoy Totem. And the another reason why this is good is because it gives you automatic power charge generation, since you get a 50% chance to gain a power charge when you place a totem. If we take a look at the other side, I'm taking the Assassin's Node here because of the crit, and of course the Path of the Shadow, so that we can get access to all these juicy nodes over here. Chaos nodes, life nodes, crit nodes that we find over here in the shadow area. And if we take a look at the rest of the tree, we can see that I've taken life, of course, wherever I can find it. Life is important, of course, and also mana, since this is a mind over matter build. So these nodes, for example, Heart and Soul, are very good. You can also take Quick Recovery. I haven't done that, but those are really good nodes if you want to go more defensive. But of course, you also want damage, and that's why I'm taking these jewel slots, for example, where I've looked to get life, of course, totem life also, if you want to be more defensive. But if you want a more aggressive approach, you should look for cast speed and, you know, general damage mods. With jewels, there are lots of mods that you can use to get your damage boosts. You can have damage while dual wielding, and elemental damage, and area damage, and etc., etc. You know the drill. So yeah, jewels, I have that here, where else? Here, yeah, so 3 jewel slots. You can get more if you have the points. Of course, I'm taking these power charges, where, there, and area damage here, and here, in the Templar area. And finally, I'd say I've taken all the totem nodes that you can get with this build, or get in the tree, I mean. So of course, Ancestral Bond, and these nodes over here, these nodes, and these nodes. So it's really up to you exactly how you want to build a tree. I've built it this way because I think it's a great balance between damage and viability, which is usually the things you have to adjust according to your preferences. But this is my version. I'll of course put a link to my account page in the description so that you can check it out in more detail. Yeah. So that was it for the skill tree. It's time to take a look at the footage now. We're going to start by looking at a footage from a Gorge map. So I'm gonna hit play here, and we're gonna watch it. So you can see I had vulnerability in this map. I recorded this footage to showcase how fast you can clear with this build. And the reason why this takes 4 minutes, or almost 4 minutes, is because I encountered 2 Harbingers, as well as 1 Essence mob in this Gorge map, which slowed down a bit. But I wouldn't say this is the fastest clearing build out there, obviously. But as you can see, as long as you keep your Quicksilvers up and just keep on running, which you can basically do, you can run straight through the packs. As long as you don't run into the mobs, you won't be in any danger. The totems will kill everything for you. So if you are a fan of totem builds, this is actually pretty fun. Let's move on to the boss fight here. So I think we're gonna find that here. Yes. So I switch out to concentrated effect before the boss fight. I didn't place out a TP here, but normally I would. It's safer. I was careless here, I see, and actually accidentally ran out of power charges, which you should normally try to avoid. I also took a lot of damage there. This is because I have a vulnerability curse on me, but also because this build doesn't really have any type of damage mitigation, like armor or evasion or dodge or block. But if we take a look at the offense part of the build, you can see that I placed 2 totems, and when the Gorge boss just stands still, my 2 totems and a Wither totem can easily kill him. So you can dish out amazing damage with this build, but you also have to watch out because you're not invincible. I wouldn't say this is a hardcore viable build, for example. No. Now we're going to take a look at another video. This is a maze boss kill. It's a perfect boss to showcase how much damage you can put out with these totems. As you can see, this is a tier 14 boss, still no problem whatsoever. Now we're going to take a look at a Calm boss fight, or boss kill, deathless. I should have placed out totems before here as well to get up my power charges, but you can see I'm trying to get up Arcane Surge. I should have also gotten my Wither totem up, however I didn't. But as you can see, even without a Wither totem, it's a very easy kill. So even tier 15 bosses, if you're selective, piece of cake. Here's another boss that I struggle a lot more with, Rigwald in Dark Forest. And this is where we actually encounter my alternative setup with a decoy totem, which I used because when he uses his projectile attack with his wolf, or his wolf projectile attack, he actually looks away, and also when he chases me, he will actually go after the totem instead. It's not foolproof, as you saw, and it also reduces the damage I dish out on him. So you have to decide on your own if you think this setup is better. I just think that when it comes to difficult tier, high tier bosses, and especially the Guardians bosses, the decoy totem has been very helpful in staying alive. And as you can see, patience is rewarding. Finally, we're going to take a look at a Beachhead map, which I recorded pretty late in the league. So this is my newest setup. As you can see, this is a tier 15 map and has no mods in it, so the mobs are killed very easily, even when it comes to the Harbinger mobs. But you can also probably see that if I get swarmed by minions, I very quickly get into a dangerous situation, and this is something you have to keep in mind when playing this build. Since you have no way of damaging the mobs yourself, you have to rely completely on your totems. Alright, I also want to show you the end here of the map. So I've already killed some of the Harbingers here, but you can see that I have to make sure to avoid the mob packed areas and try to place the totems in the periphery of those areas. That's something we'll just get used to while playing, where it's optimal to place your totems and where it's optimal to stand yourself. As you can see, certain mobs will have haste, and that makes it more difficult to avoid them. But it's not like you're getting one shot here. The problem is when you get swarmed by minions, which we will see very soon, I believe. Yeah. And this is what happens when you get swarmed by minions. So you have to keep track of where the mobs spawn in this map, so you don't get caught in the middle of them, because then you die. Other questions that I think I should address are leveling, for example, which some of you might wonder about. And the reason I said this is a great starter build is because it's actually quite nice to level with, because as soon as you get Dark Pact, you can basically clear your way to endgame. Yeah, so that's about it, I'd say. I don't think I have anything more to show in this video or talk about, but as I said in the beginning, if you're interested and want to see my Shaper and Guardian boss fights, which you can see I've actually managed to win, even though it was quite a struggle for a few of them. If you want to see videos where I showcase them, then I will publish that. So I can go into more detail, because those boss fights are a little bit more complex than the tier 15 and below bosses. So yeah, that was it for today's video. I hope this was somewhat entertaining or educative, and I'll see you next time. Have a good one.